Do you often find yourself talking to modders or developers asking for a feature to get put in, only for them to reject you? Something like, hey, can we add the 950 JDA? But it never get made? Well, I'm a modder and I've heard tons of those requests, so maybe I can teach you some tips about the ones that I did myself and the arguments that others use to get theirs done. The first tip has to do with RIZZ. The thing about RIZZ is, for modders, you want to have something in it for them. A lot of them, it's fame. Some others do it for fun. Most do it for fun. But in reality, you really want to be the type of person who approaches everything with a learning attitude. A learning attitude will get you most of the way there. See, in the worst case scenario, if you learn what makes your mod possible or impossible, you'll see that you'll be able to align your expectations with reality. You'll be able to know what is missing, what needs to be added, if there's any prerequisites to your mod, or if it just doesn't make sense to add it itself. Imagine going for an oil change on your electric car. Feels weird, right? Well, that's sometimes how modders see other people who ask in Modders Please, hey, can we add this thing that just takes a lot of work or it's practically impossible? The next point has to do with being part of the community. You really want to blend in with all the people that you're asking to work with. They don't have to be modders. You can just ask other people around in the community, hey, have we thought about adding this? Is this feature feasible? Has anyone worked on it before? You will find that it is much easier to ask for a feature to be added if you ask it as if you're part of the community. Actually, being part of the community itself is the best way. Imagine you're like at your house party and some rando comes in and asks for a specific brand of chips that doesn't make sense. You're probably gonna be like, get out of here. However, imagine if like a friend or someone who's a regular at your house party asks for that chips. You'll end up thinking of that person as part of your community and you'll want them to like succeed alongside with you. Whereas that rando you don't really care about. The same idea applies here. If you truly become part of the community, people will help you out. The next point has to do with how you structure your arguments when you're fighting with people. I don't really mean fighting, I mean when you're arguing something that they might not agree with. Your goal is clarity. Clarity is what some people call the idea of understanding another person's mind, but like exactly. So you want to know everything that the other person assumes, everything that the other person values, all of their experiences more or less, and you want them to know yours. That way you can both predict like what you're gonna think next, and that really leads to some good points. So here's an idea. If a developer tells you something like, oh man, I don't think this is possible, this is impossible, don't just go back to them and be like, oh, actually, I'm a super developer and I've done this a million times, blah, blah, blah. Be nice and, again, concentrate on clarity. Understand why exactly they don't think that thing is possible. And if you don't really get it at that point and they start getting angry, just drop the conversation. You're only gonna do yourself damage if you do this sort of thing where you get into fights where you're not focusing on understanding what the problem is. Developers notice when you're just telling them what to do. Best case scenario, you'll get something called the rubber ducky effect, which is that when a dev or someone who's an engineer or a technical person talks through a problem that they haven't really thought about before or in a long time, they might actually come up with a new way of thinking about it and solve it. So talking in this way, where you're trying to gain clarity on the situation and have them understand your thoughts, that'll make them like probably talk through and figure out something they've been meaning to solve for a while. The fourth tip has to do with timing. I should have put this point earlier, but you will inevitably run into a modder or developer who's in a bad mood. They would say something like, I've got a lot on my plate, I've already explained this before, it's too technical, or that's impossible. They might say this because they're tired, or might be working all day and they're frustrated because they've had a similar conversation with someone else who was extremely disrespectful. If you run into this, avoid the conversation at all costs. No matter if your brain tells you that you're the nation's top diplomat and that you'll thread the needle with the perfect argument, you don't, and you won't. You will burn bridges not only for yourself, but for the idea that you're asking for, and it will cause harm to the community as a whole. Many communities experience high levels of modders pleasing, and a lot of people don't really follow general decency, and it can cause a lot of like a weird feedback loop where developers get angry and they lash out or they temporarily cut contact with the community, and the community itself becomes hostile to anyone else who comes in asking for mods. And this just keeps repeating itself and we all lose in this scenario. It's best to walk away if the timing isn't right. The final point addresses if you don't have the skills, like the social skills to do all the stuff we talked about before, or if you don't think you have the patience to do that sort of thing, perhaps you can consider bribing. Bribing is really effective because you're convincing someone else to do something by giving them something they want. So consent is pretty much a go. The way mod bounties work across different communities is that there'll be some sort of posting where you'll bid on a certain idea, but the mod that you make cannot be sold. It will be available for everyone else, and all the items used in the mod have to be legal and legally acquired. So if you have to buy a model from someone, you should provide that in the price that you're paying. If your idea is really good, someone might already be working on it and you'll get it done immediately. Now, I'm a little biased about this last point, but you might consider being a modder yourself. It is a good skill, and you don't have to do everything in a mod. You can join a community and they'll teach you the skills that you're lacking in, or they'll just even help you do it with them. I mean, really, there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of communities out there. If you don't like one, you can go to the next one. And they already have all the resources for this type of stuff you want. The only limit at that point is really just your ideas. You will have the power to turn any game that you love into a game that you really love. And if you do it in a community, all the better. If you want to hear what a modder thinks when a developer says a feature is impossible, click the video on the screen.